Paris buzzed with its usual nighttime hustle. Luxury cars glided along the avenues, their gleaming bodies reflecting the city lights, while restaurant signs flickered on the sidewalks. The voices of tourists and locals blended into a constant murmur. Amidst this opulence, a man with a simple appearance walked at a steady pace toward the entrance of a five-star hotel. Click subscribe and turn on notifications. That way you'll stay updated with our upcoming videos and won't miss a thing. The Hotel Lumière, one of the city's most prestigious establishments, flaunted an immaculate facade. Marble columns, gleaming chandeliers, and a uniformed doorman with white gloves stood at the entrance, opening the door with the courtesy the place demanded. However, when he noticed the man approaching in modest attire, the doorman slightly furrowed his brow. Before quickly regaining his neutral expression, the man walked in without hesitation. Sadio Mané had just arrived, but not as the international star the world knew. Dressed in a simple dark jacket, worn-out jeans and sneakers, he moved with the ease of someone who wasn't seeking attention. He wanted a discreet stay, a place to rest away from the spotlight. The lobby was a spectacle of elegance. Polished marble floors, a crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling like a sun made of diamonds, and a faint lavender scent floating in the air. But what stood out the most was not the luxury. It was the glances. At the reception desk, Camille, a slender young woman with a trained smile, observed the newcomer with a scrutinizing gaze. Her pristine ivory-colored suit and upright posture radiated professionalism, but also carried an air of arrogance, accentuated by the way she scanned him from head to toe. "May I help you?" she asked, her smile tense. Sadio nodded politely and slid his ID onto the counter. "I have a reservation," he said in a calm voice. Camille took the document, but before even checking it in the system, she lifted her gaze with a barely noticeable smirk. "This hotel is not exactly inexpensive, sir," she commented, in a tone that did little to hide her disbelief. There was a brief silence. Behind the counter, two employees pretended to shuffle papers, though they were clearly listening. In the background of the lobby, a bellboy froze mid-step, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Sadio held her gaze steadily. He didn't react, didn't frown, didn't show any sign of annoyance. He simply extended his credit card. "If you'd like, I can pay right now." Camille narrowed her eyes. Still without checking the reservation, she made a vague gesture with her hand. "As per hotel policy, in certain cases, we require an additional deposit as a guarantee," she announced, tilting her head slightly. The murmurs among the employees grew. A younger receptionist moved his lips as if wanting to say something, but hesitated. "No problem," Sadio replied with a half-smile that unsettled Camille. The receptionist, puzzled by his lack of reaction, processed the payment with firm hands and, with no other option, handed him the key to a basic room. No bellboy assistance, no customary courtesy, no warm welcome like other guests received. Sadio took the key calmly, thanked her, and walked toward the elevator without looking back. Just before the doors closed, he sensed a movement beside him. "I'm really sorry, sir," a young employee whispered. "Camille isn't usually like this. Well, not always." Sadio glanced at him sideways, evaluating his words. Then he simply nodded and watched as the doors sealed him off from the rest of the world. Inside, the scene at the reception didn't bother him, but it did make him reflect. He had learned that life's real lessons didn't come from those who treated you well, but from those who underestimated you. That night, sitting by the window of his simple room, he gazed at the lights of Paris and made a decision. Not a subscriber. Yet, join our community by clicking subscribe and turn on the notification bell to get alerts every time a new video is out. He wouldn't leave just as another guest. There was something deeper about this place, something that needed to change. The morning in Paris arrived with a sky painted in shades of pink and gold, reflecting on the Hotel Lumière's grand windows. Inside the hotel, everything remained impeccable. The gleaming marble floors, the crystal lamps casting elegant glimmers, and the employees in their pristine uniforms, ready to start another day. For Sadio Mané, however, this place was no longer just a luxury hotel. It was a mirror of hidden prejudices, where appearances dictated treatment and where respect seemed reserved only for those who fit the profile of exclusivity. From his window, he watched the city awaken and made up his mind. Before revealing who he truly was, he wanted to understand how this hotel worked at its core. He walked down to the hotel restaurant. As he crossed the threshold, he immediately sensed the change in atmosphere, the elegant murmur of conversations in French, the clinking of crystal glasses on perfectly set tables, and the waiters moving with rehearsed precision. But not all employees carried themselves with the same attitude. Camille was there, and the moment she saw Sadio enter, she made a small expression of displeasure, as if his very presence disrupted the refined ambience of the place. Sadio chose a discreet table by the window and waited. The waiters passed by, prioritizing guests with gleaming watches and tailored suits. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, nothing. Finally, a young waiter with brown hair and a pristine uniform approached him, visibly nervous. His name was Julian. "Good morning, sir. Would you like to start with some coffee?" he asked in a low voice, glancing toward the bar. Sadio noticed how his hands trembled slightly. His eyes darted around as if afraid someone was watching. "Yes, please." "Something light for breakfast," Sadio replied kindly. As Julian took the order, Camille murmured something to another employee, discreetly gesturing toward Sadio. Stifled laughter followed. The footballer caught fragments of the conversation. "What is someone like him doing here? He probably got the wrong hotel." The words carried the same coldness as the morning air. But once again, Sadio did not react. Instead, he took a sip of his coffee and observed. He would watch every corner of that hotel. Throughout the day, Sadio moved through the hotel, not as a guest, but as an invisible observer. In the lobby, he saw Camille treat an elderly couple with absolute indifference. They were dressed simply and were asking for local restaurant recommendations. "Everything is online. You can look it up yourselves," she said, without even lifting her eyes from her computer screen. The couple walked away in silence, clearly uncomfortable. In the hallway, a cleaning staff member recognized Sadio but showed no sign of excitement. Instead, he whispered in a low voice, "Don't worry, sir. Not everyone here is like her." The comment lingered in Sadio's mind. It wasn't just the guests who suffered from Camille's attitude. The employees did too. Later, while waiting for the elevator, he saw Lucas, a young bellboy struggling to carry multiple suitcases. Camille passed by without even glancing at him and coldly said, "Make sure you don't scratch them. I don't want complaints from important guests." Lucas, sweating under the weight of the luggage, simply nodded without responding. At that moment, Sadio confirmed what he had suspected all along. The problem wasn't just Camille. The problem was a culture that tolerated and enabled her behavior. And Sadio Mané was ready to change everything. Nightfall draped Paris in its usual elegance. From his hotel window, Sadio Mané watched the city lights, but his mind was far from the beauty of the French capital. His stay at Hôtel Lumière was no longer just about rest. What he had witnessed in the past hours had led him to a decision. He couldn't just stand by. The discrimination he had personally experienced didn't anger him as much as the impact he saw on the employees. A hotel wasn't just a structure of marble and glass. It was the people who kept it running every day, the bellboys, the waiters, the cleaning staff, and they lived under a shadow that crushed them. Sadio took his phone and began taking notes. Every interaction, every injustice, every detail. The next morning, instead of having breakfast in the restaurant, he decided to explore areas of the hotel that few guests ever visited. Following a long hallway, he arrived at the service area of the hotel, a place where luxury faded and reality emerged. The contrast was striking. The elegant carpets gave way to worn-out tiles. The chandeliers were replaced by harsh fluorescent lights. The scent of designer perfumes was overtaken by the smell of cleaning products. Here, the employees spoke more freely, away from the critical gaze of Camille and other supervisors. It was a completely different world from what the guests knew. Help our channel grow, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with our upcoming content. And tell us, where are you watching from? Comment below. In the small staff cafeteria, Sadio recognized Julian, the young waiter who had served him on his first day. He was sitting with a cup of coffee in his hands, his gaze tired, his face tense. "May I sit?" Sadio asked with his characteristic politeness. Julian blinked, surprised, and quickly nodded. "Oh, of course, sir." Sadio noticed the nervousness in his tone. "Just Sadio," he corrected with a smile. "Tough day?" The young man let out a sigh and glanced around before responding in a low voice. "Every day is tough here. We like working at this hotel, but some people make it unbearable." Sadio didn't need to ask who he was referring to. "Why doesn't anyone say anything?" Julian laughed, but not with amusement. "Because she has power, because the managers do nothing, because everyone thinks it's normal to be treated this way in a luxury hotel." Sadio took a sip of his coffee and reflected for a moment. "But if someone with enough influence spoke up, would things change?" Julian looked at him curiously. "I suppose so. But no one here has that kind of influence." Sadio didn't respond. What Julian didn't know was that someone did have that influence, and he was about to use it. Later that day, as he returned to his room, the hotel manager, Pierre, requested a meeting with him. When Sadio entered the private office, he found a middle-aged man with a tense expression. "Mr. Mané, it's a pleasure to meet you." It was the first time anyone in the hotel had addressed him with recognition. Pierre had figured out who he was. "Is there anything about our service that hasn't met your expectations?" the manager asked diplomatically. Sadio smiled calmly. "Actually, yes." Pierre shifted in his seat. "We greatly value our guests' opinions. I'm more than just a guest." The manager blinked. Sadio leaned slightly forward, holding Pierre's gaze with quiet intensity. "I want to speak to the entire hotel staff. Organize a meeting. I have something important to announce." Pierre hesitated. "Mr. Mané, these kinds of meetings are not common practice. Do it." Sadio's tone was so firm that Pierre, though confused, nodded without argument. Within minutes, the news of the special meeting spread through the hotel corridors. Employees whispered among themselves, wondering what a guest could possibly want to discuss with all of them. But one person was more unsettled than anyone else. Camille. From the reception desk, she watched warily as employees gathered in small groups, mentioning the unexpected meeting. She crossed her arms and pressed her lips together. Something was about to happen, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't in control. The rumor of the special meeting quickly spread throughout Hôtel Lumière. From the bellboys to the kitchen chefs, everyone wondered what an ordinary guest could possibly want with the staff. But Sadio Mané was no ordinary guest. As the employees gathered in the grand conference room, anticipation grew. Some whispered to each other, others cast curious glances toward the entrance, and a few, like Julian and Lucas, furrowed their brows, sensing that something important was about to happen. Camille, on the other hand, tried to maintain her air of superiority. She sat at the back of the room, arms crossed, pretending to be indifferent, but inside, uncertainty was eating away at her. When Sadio entered the room, the murmuring stopped. There was something about his presence, about the quiet but firm way he carried himself, that demanded attention. Pierre, the hotel manager, cleared his throat and stood up. "Good morning, everyone." As you all know, Mr. Mané has requested this meeting to share something important with us. Some employees exchanged glances, their curiosity growing. Mr. Mané, the microphone is yours. Sadio took a step forward and scanned the room. He saw curiosity, nervousness, skepticism, but he also saw something deeper in some faces: fatigue, resignation, fear. He took a deep breath and in a clear and steady voice began, "Before I tell you why I'm here, I want to thank you." The silence deepened. Over the past few days, I have had the opportunity to observe how this hotel operates. I have seen the effort each of you puts into your work. I have seen genuine smiles, but I have also seen something else. He paused. I have seen fear. I have seen distrust. I have seen an environment where not everyone feels valued. The employees shifted in their seats. Some lowered their gazes as if they had been exposed. From the back of the room, Camille tensed up. Sadio continued, his voice firm. "What you may not know is that I am not just a guest." Camille's breath caught in her throat. "I am the new owner of this hotel." The room erupted in murmurs. Some employees were left speechless. Others turned to their colleagues, seeking confirmation that they had heard correctly. The shock was absolute. But no one was more stunned than Camille. The color drained from her face. She was frozen, as if the ground had been pulled from beneath her feet. Sadio raised a hand, calling for silence once again. "I have lived in this hotel like any of you. I have seen what an ordinary guest sees. I have felt what an ordinary guest feels. And I'm not satisfied with what I have seen." Pierre swallowed hard. "I am not here to single anyone out just yet," Sadio continued, his gaze unwavering as it swept across the crowd. "But I am here to make one thing clear. Things are going to change." The air in the room grew thick. Employees who had suffered in silence began to sit up straighter in their chairs, and for the first time, Camille lowered her gaze. When the meeting ended, employees left the room whispering to one another, their faces filled with astonishment. Sadio remained standing, watching Camille. She didn't move. She had known this moment would come. As the last employees exited, Sadio walked slowly to the table where she still sat. "Now that you know who I am, I want to hear from you." Camille swallowed hard, feeling exposed. For years, she had wielded control over the hotel staff, looking down on others. But now she had no escape. "Mr. Mané, why did you treat me that way?" Sadio asked, his voice calm, yet carrying an authority that made it impossible to evade the question. Camille clasped her hands together, nervous. "I was just doing my job." Sadio raised an eyebrow. "Is your job to humiliate people who don't seem to fit in this hotel?" Camille felt a knot in her stomach. "That wasn't my intention." "Yes, it was." Silence fell over the room. Camille felt the weight of the truth crushing her. For the first time, she had no excuses, no arguments. "You have two options, Camille. Reflect on your attitude and prove that you can change, or continue as you are and face the consequences." Camille's eyes filled with uncertainty. Sadio waited, giving her space to process his words. Finally, she nodded, but her expression showed that the real battle within her was only beginning. The news of the meeting and the true identity of Sadio Mané transformed the atmosphere of the hotel. Employees who had once moved cautiously, whispering for fear of retaliation, began to stand a little taller. Julien, the young waiter, was the first to approach Sadio when he saw him at the restaurant that afternoon. "Mr. Mané, I just want to say thank you." Sadio smiled. "Don't thank me just yet. This is only the beginning." The days following the big revelation were a whirlwind of emotions at Hotel Lumière. Want more content like this? Then hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there's always new content here and you won't want to miss out. The news that Sadio Mané was the new owner had not only shaken the staff, but also created a new dynamic in the hotel. For the first time, employees felt like they had a voice. But change wouldn't happen overnight. Sadio knew that. So instead of implementing drastic reforms immediately, he chose to observe, to see how each person adapted to the new reality. And most of all, how Camille processed his warning. At reception, Camille was no longer the same. Not because she had suddenly changed, but because, for the first time in years, she was not in control. Before, she moved with confidence, certain that she could impose her authority over any guest or employee. But now, there was uncertainty in every one of her gestures. The employees noticed Julian, Lucas, the cleaning staff. They all looked at her differently. But Camille, still too proud, refused to acknowledge it until something happened that forced her to face herself. It was a rainy afternoon in Paris. The hotel's revolving door spun violently, and a man in an expensive suit stormed in, dragging his suitcase with an expression of pure disgust. He was a business tycoon, one of those clients who demanded immediate attention and didn't tolerate mistakes. "This is unacceptable," he bellowed, pointing disdainfully at the lobby's furniture arrangement. "Who decorated this? An amateur." The employees exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to be the first to step forward. Before, Camille would have reacted with arrogance. She would have responded with sarcasm or feigned patience. But this time, she took a deep breath and approached calmly. "Sir, I'm sorry your arrival hasn't met your expectations. Please tell me how we can improve your stay." The businessman looked at her with disdain. "I expect you to. Because so far, this hotel is not up to my standards." Camille remained composed. There was no trace of her former haughty attitude. From across the lobby, Sadio watched in silence. And for the first time, he felt that Camille was truly trying to change. That night, Sadio found Camille in the staff cafeteria. She sat alone, a cup of tea in her hands. When she saw him approaching, she straightened her back, still holding on to a bit of pride. Sadio sat across from her. "You handled that client well today." Camille looked at him surprised. Was that a compliment? Sadio smiled. It was recognition. She lowered her gaze, stirring her tea with the spoon. "I'm trying. I don't know if I'm doing it right." Sadio rested his elbows on the table. "Real change doesn't happen overnight. But what matters is that you've started." Camille looked at him intently. She hadn't expected him to support her, not after everything, and yet here he was, giving her the chance to prove she could be better. For the first time in years, Camille felt that someone believed in her, and that changed everything. The days passed and change became visible. The employees no longer walked in fear. Bellboys like Lucas no longer avoided eye contact with their superiors. Waiters like Julian smiled more. And Camille was learning. It wasn't an easy process. There were moments when she nearly fell back into her old ways, moments where habit told her to respond coldly or condescendingly. But every time she was about to do so, she remembered Sadio's gaze. She remembered the second chance he had given her. And she stopped herself. The employees began to notice. At first, they watched her with skepticism. They thought it was an act. But when they saw her change over time, when they saw her help a new employee with patience, when they saw her respond politely to a guest she once would have ignored, when they saw her doing things she never would have done before, they began to accept her. Weeks later, Sadio gathered the staff in the same conference room where, not long ago, he had made his big revelation. The employees looked more united, more confident, and Camille was there. Sadio took the microphone and looked around the room. "A while ago, I was told that changing this hotel's culture would be impossible," the audience murmured, "that things were the way they were, that there was no other way to do them." Silence fell. "But you have proven that's not true." The employees' faces lit up. "This hotel is not just a place of luxury. It should be a place where people feel welcome, where everyone is treated with respect. The employees erupted into applause, and in the back of the room, Camille clapped too. Hotel Lumière was no longer the same. Weeks after Sadio Mané's big revelation, the hotel's atmosphere had changed in ways no one thought possible. The staff no longer walked in fear. The bellboys now spoke with guests more confidently. The waiters no longer feared harsh criticism, and the cleaning staff felt their work was valued. Even the guests noticed the difference. This hotel feels warmer, more welcoming, a middle-aged woman commented over breakfast. It's true, her husband agreed. Before it was luxurious, yes, but something was missing. And what had been missing was now abundant: respect, empathy, and warmth. But there was an even more surprising change. Camille. One afternoon, Sadio Mané was watching the hotel lobby when something unexpected happened. A group of young tourists burst into the reception area, dragging worn-out suitcases and dressed casually. It was clear they weren't accustomed to luxury hotels. Camille, who was at the front desk, saw them enter. In the past, her reaction would have been immediate. She would have frowned. She would have scanned their simple clothes from head to toe. She would have asked coldly if they were sure they had a reservation. But now, Camille smiled. "Welcome to Hotel Lumière. How can I assist you?" The tourists, surprised by the warmth in her voice, glanced at each other and smiled. From the other side of the lobby, Sadio watched the scene in silence. And in that moment, he knew Camille had made it. That night, Sadio gathered the staff in the hotel's event hall. He stood before them and looked at each person in the room. He saw faces filled with pride, employees who had regained their dignity, people who no longer feared speaking up, a team that now worked with a purpose. He took the microphone and spoke firmly. "This hotel is not just a place where people come to sleep." The room fell into absolute silence. "It is a place where every person who walks through those doors should feel welcome." Some employees nodded with emotion. "It doesn't matter who you are, how you dress, or how much money you have. Everyone deserves respect." Applause filled the room. Camille, standing in the front row, clapped as well. But she didn't stop there. She stepped toward Julian and Lucas, the employees who had once suffered under her authority. She looked them in the eyes and, with humility, extended her hand. "Thank you for your patience with me." Lucas stared at her, surprised. Julian smiled, and they shook hands. The applause grew even louder. Camille was no longer the same. Hotel Lumière was no longer the same. And it had all started with the humility of one man, Sadio Mané. Later that night, Sadio stepped out onto the hotel balcony. The lights of Paris flickered before him, reflecting on the Seine like a million stars trapped in the water. Pierre, the manager, approached and leaned against the railing beside him. "Mr. Mané, what you've done here is not just transform a hotel. You've transformed lives." Sadio smiled humbly. "I've always believed that respect and empathy can change the world." Pierre nodded. "And you've proven it." The night breeze blew gently. Sadio gazed at the city. He knew his mission at Hotel Lumière was complete, but he also knew something else. Real change doesn't end with a story. Real change is an ongoing process, and he would keep transforming the world, one place at a time. If this story inspired you, leave a like to support the channel and subscribe for more content like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapters, and let us know, where are you watching from? We love hearing from every corner of the world that our channel reaches.